Hey, before we begin, let's try something. Comment the time where you're watching this, and tell me which part of the world you're in. It's always interesting to see how many of us are awake, scattered across different places, all listening to the same story in the dark. And if you enjoy these videos, a like or a comment helps them reach more people who love horror, or people who might wish they hadn't clicked at all. Alright? Lights down, volume up. Let's get into the story. It was senior year, and the party was the biggest one of the year. Everyone from our school was there until the police, alerted by noise complaints, showed up and shut everything down around midnight. Me, Andy, and Matthew were all pretty messed up from the night, experiencing a mix of adrenaline, alcohol, and bad decisions. So the simple plan was just to crash at my house for the night. The distance to my house was only a 3 or 4 minute walk, and as we were stumbling along the sidewalk, still laughing about the stupid party drama, I first noticed it. A flicker of movement, a shape that was too tall and too still, hiding in the dark cluster of bushes lining the property 2 houses down. I quickly nudged Andy and Matthew and pointed, but because we were all so drunk and high, none of us could really trust our own eyes, so we figured it was probably just a trick of the light or maybe our minds playing tricks, and we didn't bother to investigate, simply slowing our pace and walking home mostly in silence. When we arrived home, we ate a few snacks in my room, trying to rehydrate, and prepared for bed, since my brother doesn't live here anymore for personal reasons, leaving his bed empty. I took the extra mattress on the floor, letting Andy and Matthew claim my bed and my brother's bed, and we chatted in low whispers for a few minutes, enjoying the last quiet echoes of the night, until the complete exhaustion finally claimed them within 10 minutes. However, I couldn't drift off to sleep because the image of that tall, still figure in the bushes kept surfacing, amplified now by the returning soberness, until I finally calmed myself down, accepted the exhaustion, and closed my eyes. I woke up abruptly later, immediately jolted by an intense, dry cold that felt completely wrong, as if it didn't belong inside the house, and when I sat up, I saw the window wide open, letting in the sharp November air. I distinctly remember closing the window before we settled down. So shivering, I got up and firmly latched it shut, dismissing the cold and the strange event as part of my half-awake confusion. Before laying back down, I went into the hall to grab a glass of water from the bathroom, and as I came back up the stairs, my eyes scanning the shadows of the dimly lit landing, I thought I saw it again. A very tall, dark outline near the banister, the exact same massive figure from the bushes. I didn't bother to investigate this time, because I was too sleepy and instantly rationalized it away, telling myself it was just a shadow or whatever the fuck. So I finished my water and went back into my room, pulling the door closed behind me. I lay back down on the mattress on the floor, turning my head to the left toward the beds where Andy was lying nearest to the edge, and directly under the bed, perfectly framed in the 3-inch gap between the mattress frame and the floor, was the head and shoulders of the figure. It was blended so seamlessly into the pitch-black shadow under the bed that you couldn't see its body, only the impossible stark white of its features, and its big smile was stretched unnaturally wide, splitting its dark face, while its eyes were wide open, staring directly up at Andy, who was sleeping mere inches above it, completely silent and still. I let out a shriek that felt violently ripped from my throat, a sound of pure, unfiltered terror, and scrambled backwards, slamming against the dresser, screaming at Andy and Matthew at the top of my lungs to get out of the room with me right now. The screams sliced through their sleep, and they both jolted awake, confused and stumbling. But the sheer panic in my voice was enough, so we bolted immediately. Out the door, down the hall, and into my parents' bedroom, slamming the heavy door shut and locking it with a desperate metallic thunk. I immediately grabbed my phone and began whispering, almost inaudibly, to the police, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words, because I was terrified that whatever the F it was would hear me. As I was on the phone, the floorboards outside the room began to groan, and we heard big, slow steps, deliberate and heavy, moving from door to door, searching the upstairs hall, and the footsteps became more aggressive when the search didn't immediately yield us, followed by the rhythmic banging as the thing began hitting the locked doors of the spare rooms. Suddenly, the footfalls stopped right outside the bedroom where we were hiding, and we held our breath, frozen in absolute helplessness. The silence so thick we could hear our own frantic heartbeats. The locked door to my parents' heavy oak bedroom was brutally kicked down with a single hit, and the crash of wood splintering was deafening, causing me to let out a big gasp, utterly terrified by the overwhelming force that could dismantle a locked barrier so easily. The figure was inside the room now, and we could hear the slow, careful search beginning, the sound of heavy movement just inches from the closet where we were huddled. Then, piercing through the silence, we heard the faint, beautiful sound of police sirens approaching fast. The searching stopped and the figure ran, not with slow steps, but with frantic, powerful speed. However, it was too late for him and the police got him. We stayed hidden in the closet, shaking, until the police entered the house and confirmed it was finally safe. When we finally went downstairs, we saw him in cuffs. He was a huge, black man, easily 7 feet tall, and as he was escorted out, he caught my eye and flashed that same wide grin, an expression of pure, malicious glee. The police later confirmed that he had escaped from a nearby mental hospital, and they contacted my parents, who couldn't come right away because they were on a business trip. So I slept at Andy's house that night just to be safe. From that day on, I wouldn't walk without looking over my shoulder, and I still can't fall asleep in a dark room without checking the space under the bed. The whole apartment felt dirty and smelled bad, like something sour was stuck in the air. This was because the huge warehouse party we came from had finally slowed down after the police almost arrived. Now the big loft felt like an empty, quiet shell of the loud rave we had just escaped on the edge of downtown Seattle. We had all come in around 2 in the morning, just the last few people who were still awake, to sleep on the couches and air mattresses that Taylor had borrowed somehow. None of us had enough money for Ubers, and we were too tired and too drunk to go home. It was 4:11 in the morning now. Everything felt silent and lonely, because we were on the 3rd floor of an old factory building with the doors locked. All our phones were almost dead and lying in one pile, and everyone else was either already asleep or completely wiped out. I was the only one who could not fall asleep. My heart kept beating too fast because I was hiding a terrible secret that was eating me alive. I had stolen a very personal sentence from Riley's college essay about her dad who had passed away. I used it in my own college essay. I got accepted and she got put on the wait list. I never told her, and the guilt felt like something rotten inside me. I was lying on the rug right next to Riley's air mattress, staring at the small red numbers on the digital clock. Then I noticed something strange. Riley was not breathing in the slow, heavy way she normally did when she slept. That worried me. I pushed myself up on one elbow, feeling my stomach tighten with fear. Her eyes were wide open. She was staring straight up at the ceiling beams without blinking. Her face looked loose and empty, but her forehead was covered in sweat that reflected the red glow from the clock like a shiny wet spot. Then I heard a sharp, dry sound, a strange rasp, like paper ripping. It wasn't coming from her mouth, came from deep in her throat. A low, creepy voice slid out of her, almost like something else was speaking through her. And it said the exact thing that terrified me most. "You thought you could steal it." The voice sounded deep and wrong, twisting the personal sentence I had stolen into a horrible, teasing message. I jerked backward in shock and slammed into the coffee table, knocking over empty cans. The noise woke up Alex on the couch. He groaned loudly because of his hangover and told me to calm down. But I couldn't calm down. I screamed at Riley, pointing at her and telling her to wake up and look at me. But she didn't move like a normal sleepy person. Instead, she sat up slowly, with a smooth, unnatural motion. When she turned her head, the red light showed a terrible, too-wide grin that twisted her soft face into something cruel. Her warm hazel eyes were now black and empty, like deep holes. I knew, right away, that this was not Riley anymore. Something else was inside her, wearing her body like a costume. It spoke through her throat in a low, purring voice, saying it could hear everything and see everything now. It said that my silence about the secret was all the confession it needed. Then the thing inside Riley turned suddenly, not toward me, but toward Alex, who was rubbing his eyes on the couch. She moved unbelievably fast, way too fast for a human. She smashed her elbow into the side of his head with a cracking sound like dry wood breaking. He collapsed without a sound and went completely limp. This wasn't a drunken fight. This was something violent and terrifying, something that destroyed all sense of safety. The thing inside Riley stood over Alex for a moment, its body shaking with controlled anger. Then its eyes locked onto the heavy metal floor lamp beside the bookshelf. The lamp had a strong iron base, heavy enough to be a weapon, right near where Jordan was sleeping. Jordan jumped up as soon as he realized something was wrong. His eyes were full of fear, but before he could move away, Riley's hand grabbed the lamp cord. Sparks flew as she ripped it from the wall. She swung the lamp above her head in a fast, brutal motion, like someone chopping wood. The lamp hit Jordan with a loud crash. The bulb exploded. Jordan screamed as he fell, blood spilling onto the rug. Taylor, who owned the loft, woke up and saw everything. She let out a high, animal-like scream and began crawling backward toward the door. Her shoes slid in spilled vodka. The thing inside Riley seemed to enjoy watching her panic. I felt frozen, completely powerless. My best friend's body was being used like a weapon, attacking us with unnatural strength. And I knew that if I tried to fight back, I could end up hurting or killing the real Riley. I yelled, "Stop it!" and lunged toward the lamp cord, trying to pull it away. But Riley, or the thing inside her, was too fast again. She grabbed my wrist with a crushing grip that made her nails dig deep into my skin. She yanked me backward and slammed me against a cold steel beam. The metal pressed hard into my back through my shirt. Her face was right in front of mine. Her breath felt hot and smelled like blood or metal. She told me in a rough, painful voice to tell everyone the truth about the sentence I stole. She said I deserved this punishment. She smashed my head against the steel beam. White flashes of light burst behind my eyes, and I slid down, dizzy. She picked up a small bottle of alcohol from the floor and said that the bond between Riley and me was weak, and now it belonged to her to destroy. Taylor was dragging herself toward the loft door, her nails scratching the wooden floor. But Riley turned, crossed the room in 2 huge steps, and smashed the bottle onto the back of Taylor's neck. Taylor collapsed instantly, silent and unconscious. For a single moment, everything went still. 3 of my friends were hurt, bleeding, or not moving at all. And the creature or spirit or whatever it was stood in the middle of the disaster, breathing hard and sharp. I saw my chance. While it wasn't looking at me, I crawled over the injured bodies. My hands slid through blood and something warm and sticky. I forced myself up and ran toward the hallway. I raced up the metal stairs to the loft above just as the door below exploded from a hard kick. The sound chasing me was not a scream of anger. It was Riley's real voice, broken, crying, full of pain, shouting the exact sentence I had stolen from her essay. The hollow echo of an empty chair at dinner, teaching me to fill silences with steel. She screamed it loudly, like she needed the whole quiet city to hear. I pushed open the fire escape door. My boots hit the wet metal steps, and I ran away from the sound, away from the truth, away from the empty shell of my friend. Behind me, the loft was quiet like a tomb. The rain hit my face like needles as I ran until I reached the empty street. I finally called 911 with shaking hands. I leaned against a wall covered in graffiti and told the operator that my friends were badly hurt and that the girl who did it was not herself. The police arrived quickly. After they secured the area, they brought me back upstairs. The loft was now full of yellow police tape. Paramedics were treating Alex, Jordan, and Taylor. Riley was handcuffed loosely to the arm of the couch. Her head was bent down. When she looked up at me, her eyes were hazel again, soft and familiar. She wasn't smiling. She was crying, and the tears made clean lines through the dirt on her face. Her lips moved slowly, forming one silent word. Why? They let me go at sunrise. I returned to my dorm while the city was just waking up. But the stolen sentence wasn't just a piece of writing anymore. Felt like it lived inside me now. At night, in the quiet, I sometimes still hear the deep, patient voice whisper through Riley's throat. You thought you could steal it. And sometimes late at night when I am scrolling on my phone, I see her profile appear for a second with a ghost-like post, marked at exactly 4:11 a.m., showing those same awful words, staring back at me like eyes that never blink. I always thought I was the cautious one, the guy who made the smart decisions and knew exactly when to leave a party. But that night, the cheap beer and the late hour made me feel completely invincible, which was a huge mistake. My best friend, Leo, and I had just walked out of a huge, loud house party near the university, and the sudden cold air of the street felt like a sharp shock on my face after being in that hot, crowded room for so long. It was dark around 3:30 in the morning, and we were stumbling down the empty, dark streets, laughing way too loud and feeling foolishly like we were the only 2 people who mattered in the whole world. I really should have just called a taxi to go home, but Leo started talking about a stupid challenge we made when we were teenagers, that we were both too scared to walk through the old Oakwood cemetery after the clock struck midnight, and because I was drunk, it suddenly sounded like the most exciting, funniest idea we had ever come up with. The cemetery was just 2 blocks away from where we were standing, a big, dark space full of massive trees and cold, old stones right next to the highway, so we quickly headed toward the huge iron gates, daring each other to be absolutely silent once we stepped inside. The iron gates were very old and, even worse, they were unlocked, so we easily slipped through the gap, and the loud noise from the nearby highway instantly disappeared, leaving behind only the sound of our fast, heavy breathing and the faint rustling of dry leaves under our sneakers. The cemetery felt much bigger and much colder inside than it looked from the street, and all the dark stone monuments seemed to be leaning in toward us in the moonlight, quietly watching everything we did. We started walking down the central path, which was just dirt, trying to find the very oldest graves we could, still whispering silly jokes to try and keep our courage up, but the alcohol was quickly fading away, and it was replaced by a cold, sharp, very uncomfortable feeling of being totally exposed. That uncomfortable feeling got instantly worse when we stopped near a huge, crumbling stone statue of an angel that was missing both of its hands. Leo pulled out his phone to take a picture of the creepy statue, but as he lifted it up, the screen flickered once, and the entire phone immediately went dead. I quickly pulled out my phone to check the time, but mine was dead too, even though I knew the battery had been almost full only minutes ago, and at that horrible moment, the entire cemetery suddenly felt like it had been completely cut off from the world of the living. Right after that, we heard a terrifying sound that definitely did not belong in a quiet cemetery. It was not a small twig snapping or the natural sound of the wind, but the very distinct, slow, grating sound of a metal shovel dragging heavily across loose dirt from somewhere deep in the very back section of the huge graveyard. Leo and I instantly looked at each other, now totally sober, and the fear that hit us was so sudden and sharp it felt like swallowing a piece of broken glass, because who would possibly be digging in a dark, cold cemetery at 3:45 in the morning? We quickly ducked down low behind a tall, granite gravestone, listening closely, and we heard the sound again. The slow, heavy drag of metal moving earth, coming just a little bit closer to where we were hiding. Leo whispered that maybe it was just a sleepy groundskeeper who had to work late, but the cold air around us felt thick and heavy, and I knew that was a stupid lie because groundskeepers don't work in the deepest darkness without even using a flashlight. We began to crawl on our hands and knees between the endless rows of cold stones, trying to sneak back toward the front gates. But then we heard a new, worse sound. The sound of soft, slow, measured footsteps coming toward us from the dirt path that we had just come from. We realized we were completely trapped between the shovel sound coming from the back and the quiet footsteps coming directly from the front. We froze completely behind a large monument, trying not to breathe, and the slow, soft footsteps stopped right next to our hiding place. And then we heard a quiet, raspy voice, which was a slow whisper, that said, "You should have stayed where you were safe." This was the most terrifying thing of all because the voice sounded completely calm and very bored, like the person was just annoyed that we were interrupting some kind of important job. We immediately jumped out from behind the stone and started sprinting as fast as we could, weaving desperately through the confusing maze of tall gravestones, trying to find the way out, but the tombstones all started looking exactly the same, creating a loop of cold, white stone that made us feel completely lost. As we ran, we suddenly heard the sound of the shovel dragging right behind us, but now it was moving incredibly fast across the stone and the grass, and the footsteps were no longer soft and slow, but a sickening, quick, shuffling gait that easily kept pace with our own panicked running. The thing was not chasing us to catch us. It was definitely herding us in a specific direction. We crashed through a section of overgrown, prickly bushes and finally saw the massive iron gates right ahead. But just as we reached them, we both slipped and fell hard, landing right next to a freshly dug grave that had been left wide open. We looked up quickly, and standing directly over us was a tall, thin figure dressed in dark, muddy clothes, holding the long-handled shovel in one hand. But the figure's face was totally covered in shadow and hidden by the darkness. The figure didn't say anything at all, but with a terrible, slow movement, It used the handle of the shovel to point straight down into the new, open grave, clearly signaling exactly where it thought we belonged, and we realized that the person who was digging was not a cemetery worker, but someone who was preparing the ground just for us. Leo and I scrambled desperately to our feet, climbing awkwardly over the high iron fence, and we never once looked back as we ran down the highway, knowing that the thing with the shovel was still standing there, quietly waiting for the next night we dared to trespass.